The piercing wail of sirens cut through the morning silence like broken glass, shattering the peaceful rhythm of St. Mary's Children's Hospital. Emergency vehicles flooded the parking lot, their red and blue lights painting frantic shadows across the brick facade, while hazmat teams in white protective suits rushed toward the main entrance. Inside the pediatric wing, 8-year-old Tommy Martinez sat in his wheelchair, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur, completely unaware that his life was about to become the center of a national crisis that would expose the darkest corners of human prejudice and ultimately spark a global movement for disability rights. The boy's heart monitor beeped steadily against his chest, a small rectangular device that had kept him alive since birth, monitoring the irregular rhythms that came with his congenital heart condition. His mother, Maria Martinez, worked double shifts as a cleaning lady to afford his medical care, while his father, Roberto, drove trucks across state lines to pay for the specialized equipment Tommy needed to survive. They were a quiet family who attended Mass every Sunday, helped their neighbors during hard times, and asked for nothing more than the chance to give their son a normal childhood, despite his disabilities. 3 blocks away, Karen Whitfield stood at her pristine kitchen window, watching the emergency response unfold with cold satisfaction. Her manicured fingers drummed against the marble countertop as she observed the chaos she had orchestrated with a single phone call. Karen was the self-appointed guardian of Riverside Heights, a woman who attended every PTA meeting, organized every neighborhood watch program, and made it her business to know everyone else's business. Her husband, Richard, was a successful real estate attorney, and together they lived in the largest house on Elm Street, a colonial mansion that served as a monument to their status in the community. 30 minutes earlier, Karen had watched through her window as Maria Martinez helped Tommy from their car in the hospital parking lot. The sight of the disabled boy with his medical equipment had triggered something dark in Karen's mind, a twisted interpretation of the world around her that saw threat where none existed. She had picked up her phone and dialed 911 with steady hands, her voice dripping with false urgency as she reported what she claimed to witness. "Yes, I need to report a terrorist threat at St. Mary's Children's Hospital," Karen had said into the phone, her tone measured and convincing. "I'm watching a suspicious family bringing what appears to be an explosive device or biological weapon into the pediatric ward. The child is wearing some kind of electronic device on his chest, and I can see wires. This looks exactly like what we were warned about in the Homeland Security briefings." The 911 dispatcher, trained to take all threats seriously, had immediately activated emergency protocols. Within minutes, the hospital had been placed under lockdown. Federal agents were en route, and the CDC's bioterrorism response team was mobilizing from Atlanta. Karen watched it all unfold with the satisfaction of someone who believed she was protecting her community, her mind twisting the reality of a disabled child into the narrative of a terrorist threat. Inside the hospital, chaos erupted like a dam bursting. Nurses ran through hallways, evacuating patients from the pediatric wing, while security guards sealed all exits. Dr. Sarah Chen, the chief pediatric cardiologist, rushed toward Tommy's room, her mind racing as she tried to understand why her hospital had suddenly become the center of a bioterrorism investigation. She had been Tommy's doctor for 3 years, monitoring his heart condition, adjusting his medications, and watching him grow despite the challenges his disabilities presented. "What's happening?" Maria Martinez asked, her voice breaking as armed officers surrounded her and Tommy in the hospital corridor. Her son looked up at her with confused eyes, not understanding why men in military uniforms were pointing weapons in their direction. "We're just here for Tommy's regular appointment. Please. He's just a sick little boy." The lead federal agent, Commander Williams, approached with his weapon drawn but lowered. His years of experience had taught him to assess threats quickly, and something about this scene didn't align with typical terrorist activity. The woman before him was clearly terrified, and the child appeared to be genuinely disabled. Not a threat, but protocols were protocols, and a credible report of a bioweapon required a full response. "Ma'am, we need you and your son to remain calm," Commander Williams said, his voice steady but not unkind. "We've received reports of a potential biological threat, and we need to investigate the device your son is wearing. Can you tell me what that equipment is?" Maria's hands shook as she tried to explain, her English faltering under the stress of the moment. "It's his heart monitor. Tommy was born with a heart defect. The machine keeps track of his heartbeat and sends signals to his doctor. Please, you can ask Dr. Chen. She's been treating him since he was 5 years old." But the protocols had already been set in motion. The biocontainment team arrived in full hazmat suits, their appearance terrifying both patients and staff throughout the hospital. Yellow tape sectioned off the entire pediatric wing, while specialists in protective gear approached Tommy with equipment designed to detect chemical and biological agents. The little boy began to cry, overwhelmed by the sight of people in what looked like spacesuits surrounding him. "Doctor!" Chen fought her way through the security perimeter, her credentials and years of service finally getting her access to her patient. When she saw Tommy surrounded by hazmat-suited investigators, her heart broke. This was a child she had watched learn to walk, despite his leg braces. A boy who drew pictures of dinosaurs for her office wall. A patient whose only crime was being born different. "This is insane, Doctor," Chen shouted at Commander Williams, her professional composure cracking under the weight of injustice. "Tommy Martinez is my patient. That device is a cardiac monitoring system made by MedTech Industries. It's FDA approved and has been keeping this child alive for 3 years. Who reported this as a weapon?" The investigation continued for 2 hours, with specialists testing every component of Tommy's medical equipment, while the boy sat frightened and confused in a sealed room. His heart monitor continued its steady beeping, the same sound that had provided comfort to his family for years, now serving as evidence in a terrorism investigation. Media vans began arriving outside the hospital as word of the incident spread, their cameras pointed at the building where a disabled child was being treated as a potential terrorist. In her kitchen, Karen watched the news coverage with growing excitement. Local reporters were describing a possible bioterrorism plot at the children's hospital, validating her decision to call authorities. She called her friend Margaret from the neighborhood association, eager to share the credit for potentially saving the community. "Margaret, are you watching the news?" Karen said, her voice filled with pride. "I'm the one who called this in. I saw that suspicious family bringing some kind of device into the hospital, and I knew something wasn't right. Thank goodness I was paying attention, or who knows what could have happened to those innocent children." Margaret Patterson, a retired teacher who had worked with special needs children for 30 years, felt a cold dread creeping up her spine as she listened to Karen's description. She had seen the Martinez family at church, had watched Tommy struggle with his disabilities, and knew the kind of medical equipment children with heart conditions required. "Karen, are you talking about the Martinez boy? Tommy has a serious heart condition. That device you saw was probably his cardiac monitor." "Don't be naive, Margaret," Karen replied sharply. "These people come into our community, and we don't really know their intentions. That child was carrying electronic equipment into a hospital full of vulnerable children. I did what any responsible citizen would do." As the hours passed, the investigation revealed what Dr. Chen and Tommy's family had known all along. The device was indeed a cardiac monitor, manufactured by a reputable medical company and programmed specifically for Tommy's unique heart rhythm patterns. Lab tests confirmed that no biological or chemical agents were present, and detailed examination of the equipment showed it to be exactly what it appeared: life-saving medical technology. But the damage had already been done. News of the false alarm spread across social media, with Tommy's face appearing on television screens across the nation as the disabled child who had been mistaken for a terrorist. The family's privacy was shattered, their quiet dignity destroyed by the spectacle of armed guards surrounding their son. Roberto Martinez had to take time off work to deal with the crisis, losing wages the family desperately needed for Tommy's ongoing medical care. Commander Williams approached the Martinez family as the investigation concluded, his expression heavy with regret and frustration. In his 20 years of federal service, he had never encountered a more baseless report, and the sight of Tommy's tear-stained face would haunt him for years to come. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, I want to personally apologize for what happened here today. The report we received was completely false, and your son should never have been subjected to this treatment. We're going to investigate how this happened and make sure it never happens again. Maria Martinez held her son close, feeling his small body still trembling from the trauma of the morning. Who would do this to a child? Who would call the police and say, "My son is a terrorist. He can barely walk without his braces. He's never hurt anyone in his life." The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire, and Commander Williams knew he had to find the answer. Federal law required investigation of false reports, especially those that triggered major emergency responses and endangered public safety. The 911 call had been recorded, and tracing the source would be straightforward. What concerned him more was the mentality behind the report, the kind of thinking that could transform a disabled child into a perceived terrorist threat. Within 24 hours, investigators had traced the call to Karen Whitfield's residence. When federal agents knocked on her door the following morning, Karen initially maintained her story, insisting she had acted out of concern for public safety. But as the interrogation continued and the evidence mounted, cracks began to appear in her confidence. "Mrs. Whitfield, you reported seeing a child with what you described as an explosive device or biological weapon," Agent Rodriguez said, his voice calm but pointed. "That child is 8 years old and has been under medical care at St. Mary's Hospital for 3 years. His cardiac monitor is registered with the FDA and prescribed by his physician. What exactly made you believe this medical device was a weapon?" Karen shifted in her chair, her polished exterior beginning to crack under the pressure of official scrutiny. "I saw electronics, wires, blinking lights. In today's world, you can't be too careful. That family doesn't really belong in this neighborhood anyway. I was protecting the community." The words hung in the air like a confession, revealing the true motivation behind her false report. Agent Rodriguez had encountered this kind of thinking before, the way fear and prejudice could combine to create dangerous situations for innocent people. "Mrs. Whitfield, filing a false police report is a federal crime, especially when it involves terrorism allegations. The emergency response you triggered cost taxpayers over $200,000 and traumatized a disabled child and his family." As news of Karen's false report spread through Riverside Heights, the community began to fracture along ideological lines. Some neighbors defended her, arguing that vigilance was necessary in dangerous times. Others were horrified by what had happened to the Martinez family, organizing fundraisers to help with Tommy's medical expenses and the family's legal costs. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the incident, including interviews with Dr. Chen and other medical professionals who explained Tommy's condition and the necessity of his cardiac monitoring equipment. Margaret Patterson organized a community meeting at the local library, hoping to bring people together and address the tensions that had emerged. The meeting drew over 100 residents, filling the small community room beyond capacity. Maria and Roberto Martinez attended, bringing Tommy with them, determined to show their neighbors that their son was not a threat, but simply a child who needed medical support to survive. "I've lived in this community for 15 years," Roberto Martinez said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "My wife and I work hard, pay our taxes, and try to be good neighbors. Our son Tommy has never hurt anyone. He struggles every day just to breathe, to walk, to do the things other children take for granted. When someone looks at him and sees a terrorist, that says nothing about Tommy and everything about the person doing the looking." Tommy sat in his wheelchair beside his father, his cardiac monitor beeping softly in the quiet room. Some of the neighbors who had supported Karen looked uncomfortable as they saw the reality of the child they had feared. His leg braces were visible beneath his jeans. His breathing was labored from the exertion of attending the meeting, and his eyes held the innocence that should have been obvious to anyone who bothered to really look. Dr. Chen also spoke at the meeting, using her medical expertise to educate the community about Tommy's condition and the equipment he needed. Cardiac monitors like Tommy's are worn by thousands of children across the country. They're life-saving devices that allow kids with heart conditions to live normal lives while staying connected to their medical team. The technology is sophisticated, but it's no more dangerous than a cell phone or laptop computer. Karen Whitfield did not attend the community meeting, but her influence was felt throughout the room. Several of her supporters argued that she had acted reasonably given the current security climate, while others countered that there was no reasonable interpretation of a disabled child as a terrorist threat. The divide in the community deepened, with longtime friendships strained by disagreements over what had happened and whether Karen deserved support or condemnation. As the federal investigation continued, more disturbing details about Karen's motivations emerged. Investigators discovered a pattern of complaints she had filed with various city departments about the Martinez family and other Hispanic families in the neighborhood. She had called code enforcement about their lawn care, reported their car as abandoned when Roberto parked it on the street during his days off, and filed noise complaints about Tommy's medical equipment that were later determined to be unfounded. The investigation took an unexpected turn when federal agents discovered Karen's connection to Riverside Development Group, a real estate company that had been quietly buying properties in the neighborhood with plans for luxury condominiums. Karen's husband, Richard, worked as legal counsel for the development company, and records showed that the Martinez family's property was one of several targeted for acquisition. The family had repeatedly refused offers to sell their home, which they had purchased with savings accumulated over years of working multiple jobs. Agent Rodriguez confronted Karen with this new evidence during a second interview, her composed facade finally cracking under the weight of exposure. "Mrs. Whitfield, we've discovered your husband's business relationship with Riverside Development Group and their interest in your neighbor's property. It appears your false report was not just motivated by prejudice, but by financial gain. You attempted to use federal law enforcement as a weapon to terrorize a family into selling their home." Karen's lawyer, present for the interview, advised her not to respond, but the damage was already done. Phone records showed multiple conversations between Karen and development company executives in the weeks leading up to the false 911 call. Email evidence revealed discussions about strategies to encourage Hispanic families to relocate, with Karen suggesting that increased police attention might make them uncomfortable enough to sell their properties at below-market prices. The revelation transformed the case from a simple false report into a complex conspiracy involving real estate fraud, civil rights violations, and the deliberate targeting of minority families. Federal prosecutors expanded their investigation to include Richard Whitfield and several executives from Riverside Development Group, while civil rights organizations began building a case on behalf of the Martinez family and other affected neighbors. Tommy Martinez became an unwitting symbol of resistance against discrimination and corruption. His story spread beyond the local community through social media and national news coverage, with disability rights advocates using his experience to highlight the challenges faced by children with medical conditions. Dr. Chen testified before a congressional committee about the incident, describing how false reports could endanger patients who depended on medical equipment for survival. The trial of Karen Whitfield began 6 months after the incident, drawing national attention and protesters from both sides of the political spectrum. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of her false report, her discriminatory motivations, and her connection to the real estate conspiracy. The defense argued that she had acted out of genuine concern for public safety, but the evidence of her pattern of harassment and financial motivations undermined their case. Tommy Martinez testified during the trial, his small voice carrying across the courtroom as he described the fear he felt when armed officers surrounded him in the hospital. "I didn't understand why everyone was scared of my heart machine. It helps me breathe and keeps me alive. I thought maybe I had done something wrong, but I couldn't remember what it was." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges, filing a false police report, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, civil rights violations, and child endangerment. The judge, clearly moved by Tommy's testimony and the evidence of Karen's calculated cruelty, imposed the maximum sentence allowed under federal guidelines: life in prison, without the possibility of parole. "Mrs. Whitfield, your actions represent a profound betrayal of the trust that holds communities together," Judge Harrison said during sentencing. "You weaponized law enforcement against an innocent child and his family, not out of genuine concern for public safety, but out of greed and prejudice. The trauma you inflicted on Tommy Martinez and the resources you wasted cannot be undone. But this sentence ensures you will never again have the opportunity to harm innocent people in pursuit of personal gain." The case sparked international outrage and led to sweeping reforms in how authorities respond to reports involving disabled individuals. The Tommy Martinez Protection Act, passed by Congress with bipartisan support, required additional verification procedures for reports involving medical equipment and established severe penalties for false reports targeting people with disabilities. Police departments across the country implemented new training programs to help officers distinguish between medical devices and potential threats. Riverside Development Group was forced into bankruptcy by the federal investigation and civil lawsuits filed by affected families. Richard Whitfield was disbarred and sentenced to 15 years in prison for his role in the conspiracy. The Martinez family received a substantial settlement that covered Tommy's medical expenses for life and established a college fund that would allow him to pursue his dreams despite his disabilities. Dr. Chen used the publicity from the case to establish the Tommy Martinez Foundation, an organization dedicated to protecting the rights of children with medical conditions and educating the public about life-saving medical equipment. The foundation worked with schools, communities, and law enforcement agencies to prevent similar incidents and ensure that disabled children could live without fear of discrimination or false accusations. 5 years after the incident, Tommy Martinez celebrated his 13th birthday at St. Mary's Children's Hospital, surrounded by the medical team that had cared for him throughout his childhood. His cardiac monitor still beeped steadily against his chest, but now it was recognized as a symbol of resilience rather than a source of fear. He had grown stronger over the years, his heart condition managed through improved medications, and his spirit strengthened by the support of a community that had learned to see him as he truly was, a brave young man who refused to let disability or discrimination define his future. Maria Martinez spoke at disability rights conferences across the country, sharing her family's story and advocating for other families facing similar challenges. What happened to Tommy was terrible, but it also showed us the power of truth over fear, love over hatred. Our son is not a symbol of what's wrong with the world, but a reminder of what's possible when we choose compassion over judgment. Roberto Martinez had been promoted to dispatcher at his trucking company, using his experience to train other drivers on how to interact respectfully with disabled individuals and their families. The family had chosen to remain in their home on Elm Street, transforming it into a place of healing and hope, rather than allowing fear to drive them away. The community center that had hosted that first tense meeting now held monthly gatherings where families of disabled children could connect and support each other. Margaret Patterson continued to facilitate these meetings, her experience as a teacher helping other families navigate the challenges of raising children with special needs in a world that didn't always understand their struggles. Karen Whitfield spent her days in federal prison, her luxurious lifestyle replaced by the harsh reality of confinement. Her case had become a teaching tool in law schools and ethics courses, a cautionary tale about the consequences of allowing prejudice and greed to override basic human decency. Letters from disabled children around the world filled her cell, some expressing forgiveness and others simply trying to help her understand the impact of her actions. Tommy Martinez had dreams of becoming a doctor, like Dr. Chen, inspired by the medical professionals who had saved his life and fought for his dignity. His cardiac monitor would likely remain with him forever, a constant reminder of his mortality, but also of his strength. He had learned that being different didn't make him dangerous, and that the medical equipment that kept him alive was nothing to be ashamed of or afraid of. The beeping of Tommy's heart monitor had once been mistaken for the sound of a weapon, but it had become something far more powerful, the rhythm of hope, the steady beat of a life worth protecting, and the endless possibility of a future where disabled children could grow up without fear of false accusations or discrimination. In courtrooms and classrooms, in hospitals and homes across the world. That gentle electronic sound now served as a reminder that medical equipment saves lives, that disabled children deserve protection rather than suspicion, and that the greatest threats to community safety often come not from those who are different, but from those who refuse to see the humanity in others. The story of Tommy Martinez and Karen Whitfield had ended with justice served and lives transformed. But its impact continued to ripple outward through legislation, education, and the changed hearts of people who had learned to look beyond surface differences, to see the human dignity that connects us all. The boy who had once been mistaken for a terrorist had become a teacher, showing the world that true security comes not from suspicion and fear, but from understanding, compassion, and the courage to stand up for those who cannot always stand up for themselves.